All right, thanks, Abby, and hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us again today. Just to run through the quick agenda for today, we'll do our welcome and land acknowledgement, and we'll provide a couple of some information around some additional work that we're doing in that area, or that the city's doing. And then Erica will go through the purpose, role, and guiding principles, similar information that we've talked about before, as well as a refresher on the local regulatory authority, and kind of our roadmap of where we've come from and what we'll be still having to discuss. And then we've got some guided discussion questions that we'll go through like we have in previous sessions, and we'll leave the last 10 to 15 minutes for public comment as well. So I'll read through the land acknowledgement, and then, like I said, we have one other slide to follow up on this information. But the Department of Excise and Licenses would like to honor and acknowledge that the land on which we live and work is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples, as well as being historically tied to at least 48 contemporary tribal nations. We honor those who have stewarded this land throughout generations and recognize that government, academic, and cultural institutions were built on and continue to enact exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. As individuals and as a department, we are committed to working to dismantling ongoing systems and legacies of oppression and inequity. And we value the historical, current, and future contributions of Indigenous communities in Denver. And then we just wanted to provide a little bit of information for how the city is putting that into action. So we have some information from 3 different departments here. The Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, and a couple of programs that they are working on. The first one is Environmental Justice Indigenous Communities Program, and that's funded through the Climate Protection Fund. The next, they have 3 programs. The next one is that they are recognizing that local and Indigenous knowledge systems are foundation of the Denver's just transformation. And then they're also aiming to ensure that the city's restoration, mitigation, and adaptation policies incorporate Indigenous knowledge as a foundational component. Within the Department of Parks and Rec, they have a Living Land Acknowledgement Initiative at City Park, aiming to honor and recognize Native Americans and Indigenous communities. And then they also have a really great bison conservation project that they maintain 2 bison herds at Genesee Park and Daniels Park, and they donate those surplus bison back to the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes to return wild bison to their native homes. And then within the Department of Community Planning and Development, they are doing a historic context study right now on American Indian and Indigenous peoples. And then they also have their landmark preservation program, which gathers and shares the deep history and historic places of Denver's American Indian and Indigenous peoples communities. So if anybody is looking for more information on any of those, feel free to reach out and we can connect you with the people within those departments or within those projects. But we just wanted to share some additional information on how the city is putting some of this work into action. And I'll pass it to Erica.
All right, thanks, Molly. So nice to see you all again. So just like our last 3 meetings, we'll start with the overview of the purpose and the role of the work group before we dive into our content discussion. So the purpose of the Natural Medicine Work Group is to provide suggestions and feedback on whether and how the city and county of Denver should license and or regulate natural medicine businesses and activities. What does this mean? It means that we know that Colorado voters asked for broader access to natural medicine and that the state will begin issuing licenses next year. We acknowledge that there are critical narratives around this series of events and that there is a history of government action that has caused serious harm in communities that have traditionally practiced natural medicine. We also know that it's impossible to separate our discussions here today from this history and harm, so we don't ask you to do that. Instead, we do hope that this group can be a space for aspirational narratives about how the city can support our communities in this new legal landscape as we move forward and face the regulatory questions in front of us. That said, some reminders. The Natural Medicine Work Group will not re-legislate state law. We don't have the authority to change that state law. Next, the Natural Medicine Work Group is advisory in nature. It doesn't vote on issues or reach consensus on recommendations. When we say that we won't be looking to achieve consensus, it's because we want to honor those critical narratives that will always be baked into the work. If there is consensus on a topic or approach, we will note that in our recommendations, but we want to ensure that work group members do not feel pressure to concede on an issue that is important to them. That takes me to our next point, which is that the city will consider all input gathered through this group and from public comments and developing recommendations for the mayor and for city council. Any proposal to license or regulate natural medicine must be approved by both city council and the mayor. Again, we know that this is a fast-moving timeline, and we know that government entities rarely get anything right on the first try, if ever. So we are committed to continuous outreach and public input as we move through the process, but we're also committed to a continuous improvement. So if changes are needed in the future as implementation unfolds, we will still be here to listen and improve. So thanks again to everyone who has spoken with us and met with us in between work group meetings. We can only do this work as a community, and we are so grateful for the incredible depth of experience and knowledge and passion that each of you bring to this discussion. So that we've reviewed the purpose and role of the group, I'll repeat some of our guiding principles that we abide by in all of our work groups here in EXL. These principles are built not just on what we ask of our volunteer work group members, but also standards that we hope to hold ourselves to as the agency facilitating the work group. So this isn't just how we're asking you to treat each other, but how we agree to show up for you as well. So work group members value the expertise and unique perspectives of all other work group members. Work group members recognize the legitimacy of the interests, concerns, and goals of others, whether or not they agree. And work group members treat each other and all meeting attendees with respect, civility, and courtesy. Next, we'll talk through the local regulatory authority. So this is just a reminder of what local governments can and cannot do per state language. Local governments may enact ordinances and regulations that govern the time, place, and manner of operation of natural medicine licenses or businesses, but local governments may not prohibit the establishment or operation of natural medicine licenses or businesses. They may not prohibit the transportation of natural medicine on public roads by licensed persons, and they may not adopt ordinances or regulations that are unreasonable or in conflict with state law. So with that, I'll return to our roadmap that we've been working through the last couple of months. We are here on the June 27th meeting. We are 4 meetings in now. So today we're going to talk about facility security, cultivation and manufacturing practices and risks, sustainability, and advertising and marketing if we have the time. We have added a 5th meeting. Thank you to everyone who took the poll. That will be on July 18th. So at that meeting, we're looking to cover any topics that haven't been covered in any of the previous meetings, but especially topics we don't get to today. We're also going to talk through some ideas about evidence for community support, the general overall feeling toward a need for local licensure or local policies, and kind of treat that session as a catch-all for anything that's left on anyone's hearts or minds at that point in the discussion that hasn't specifically been asked, but you feel like sharing. So with that, I will kick it over to Abby to get us started on today's discussion.
Okay, thanks, Erica. So as a reminder, the following discussion questions are meant to help us evaluate whether there is a need for a local license, local regulations, or any programming in addition to what the state is developing. And we're not presupposing the need for a local license or regulation. So I just want to put that out there before we jump into some of these questions. So first, we want to get a sense from you all about what the expected level of risk of burglary is at healing centers, cultivation facilities, manufacturing facilities, and testing labs. When we say burglary, we mean unlawful entry into a building with the intent to commit a crime, such as theft. And then what is the expected level of risk of diversion at licensed natural medicine businesses? And when we say diversion, what we mean is when a medication, in this case, natural medicine, is taken for use by someone other than for whom it's prescribed, or in this case, administered, or taken for sale on the illicit market. So with those questions in mind, I'll open it up for discussion. I'm seeing, oh, Gabriella, go ahead. Sorry, I couldn't see your hand raised, but now I see it.
So I have a question about just backtracking a little. I think something that hasn't been clear is, so we've had these 4 meetings and they're being recorded and you're taking notes, and then you're building the recommendations based on what we're sharing here. Because I would really love to look at the draft of recommendations and understand that process. And then when does it go to city council? And just stating the need that I would like to see the recommendations before they're submitted.
Erica, do you want to address that question?
I can let Molly take that one if she wants.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so after our meeting in July, we'll kind of summarize everything. We'll probably take some time to go back and look through the videos again, read through all of our notes and make some recommendations. But there will definitely be opportunity where we will bring the information back to this group before we move everything forward, whether that's through another meeting or just through providing an opportunity for everybody to provide written comment to whatever recommendations we develop. And then, some of those recommendations, depending on what is recommended, could go through like an approval process with the mayor's office and stuff. And then once all of that is compiled, then it would go forward to like a city council process. And of course, there's opportunity throughout that process to provide feedback and public input and comment on that process as well. So, but I think we definitely plan on allowing the general public, as well as this work group specifically, an opportunity to react to whatever recommendations we do develop out of this process. Does that help?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next we'll go to Bia.
Thank you so much, Abby. Bia Campbell with Strategy 64. Going back to the 3 questions related to security requirements that you just posed, I think, in my opinion, we need a very lower barrier for security requirements here. I think just the nature of the product on in itself makes it so that we don't need to have like a safe, right? Currently in Denver, the marijuana licensees, they're required to have the safe. And it was because we were seeing a lot of burglaries inside the dispensaries of people who would buy those products and sell it into the illegal market. But for that to be economically viable for the people committing the crime, the commodity that they are selling needs to be something that is worth a lot of money in the illegal market. And I think that's just not the case here between the private use rules and the fact that, this is not it's not rocket science to have mushrooms, to cultivate them on your own. It takes a lot of very little space, some care. I think that reduces the risk of burglary, and therefore I think this is unnecessary. Moreover, with the NMED's division between small, which is I think currently at 750 milligrams, I think that on in itself already creates this threshold for lower doses for healing centers that are never going to have a lot of product inside, and therefore wouldn't even they're just not a target for burglars, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Bia. Go to Noah next.
Noah Novello with Friday Ventures. I want to agree with Bia that the risk is very low. Because of that 750 milligram limit, we're only talking about 2.5 ounces of mushrooms by dry weight, which is only a few $100s worth maybe. And since it's very easy and legal to grow and share for personal use, I don't think that they're going to be a big target for burglary and diversion. And a batch tracking system from cultivation through all the licenses should help prevent the diversion when everything is tracked. And there's a system that can be audited whenever there's a change in the weight or amount of product. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. Tristan?
Yeah, great. I mean, I can fully echo what Noah and Bia just said, and I would even just sort of elaborate on, we just want to make sure that we're still thinking sort of down the line. The more regulations that you put in place, especially things like security that are extremely costly, just decreases the access to the natural medicine for a number of different diverse groups. We've already seen sort of the financial barrier that's associated with Denver and the safes that are required. Seen grants come through the Cannabis Business Office just to pay for the safe so that they can stay open. So, based on the lack of risk, I really don't see a major reason to add that additional barrier.
Thanks, Tristan. Carissa?
I pretty much agree with everybody that the comments that have been made so far. I wouldn't expect that these facilities would have large amounts of cash on hand, especially since they're not distributing to retail dispensaries. So the risk of burglary could be significantly lower, but we don't know that for sure. I am interested to know if anybody here is aware of burglary statistics of these types in facilities of other cities and states. And if anybody would like to share that or has that information, I think that would be helpful in guiding us on this. In regard to diversion, I think the risk of diversion could be similar to that of other regulated substances. I think it could be lower than that, considering that addiction to psilocybin mushrooms is not likely and widespread. Therefore, there's not really an incentive to corrupt business owners or practitioners, but it is still possible. That's all I have.
Thank you. Since we are kind of getting into this part of the discussion, I'm going to jump to our next slide really quick and just go over some information and then ask a couple more questions, and we can kind of discuss all those questions at once. So I will get to all the hands raised, but just want to make sure that we get all that information out first. So a few people have mentioned secure storage requirements. So I just want to give some additional background context so everybody's on the same page. The draft state rules for the storage of natural medicine at healing centers require that healing centers must store all natural medicine in a secured, locked place, accessible only to owner licensees and handler licensees, and monitored by video surveillance while natural medicine is being stored. And healing centers that have more than 750 milligrams of natural medicine on site also must have a fully operational security alarm system and fully operational video surveillance system. And I will look to our friends from the Natural Medicine Division. If anybody is on the call, please feel free to raise your hand and correct me if any of that is, if I've misstated anything. So federal law requires that practitioners store controlled substances in a securely locked, substantially constructed cabinet. So that's a little bit different than the draft rules that say a secured locked place. So there's slightly different requirement in federal law. And then federal law also requires for non-practitioners that Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 controlled substances be stored in a safe or steel cabinet or a vault, meeting certain specifications, and Schedule 3, 4, or 5 controlled substances be stored in a safe or steel cabinet or a vault meeting certain specifications, or a building meeting certain security requirements, or a cage or enclosure meeting certain specifications. And then here in Denver, we have local secure storage requirements for marijuana. So marijuana stores and marijuana hospitality and sales businesses are required to store all marijuana and cash in a safe or a vault during non-business hours. And that safe or vault has to meet certain specifications. And alternatively to that, if a business isn't able to meet that requirement, they're required to meet certain facility security requirements in combination with storing only marijuana concentrate and cash in a safe or a vault during non-business hours. So what we want to hear from you all, and what some folks have kind of gotten into already, is would any local requirements for secure storage of natural medicine help to prevent burglary or diversion at natural medicine facilities? And if so, what kind of requirements might be the best fit? So we can kind of talk about those questions as well as getting into sort of the risk of burglary and diversion all at once. So I will get back to the raised hands. Michael, I think you were next.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So actually on Carissa's point there, I was already going to talk about this from the Oregon perspective. There have been no known or reported burglaries that have taken place at any licensed facilities. That's laboratories, manufacturing facilities, service centers, any of those sorts of facilities to date. A quick reminder, these facilities are doing cash only transactions, and significantly important here, their service centers are allowed to have significantly more psilocybin on hand than is allowed in Colorado, where Colorado, they're contemplating a 750 milligram cap. Oregon psilocybin service centers are allowed to have a 100 gram cap at their service center. So significantly more product than what's allowed here in Colorado. And again, there have been no reported cases of burglary or break-in entry or anything of that sense. I agree with everybody on this call. I don't think there needs to be any additional rules beyond what's occurring at the state level. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. We'll go to Tom Allen next.
Just wanted to confer with everybody. We want to be aware of having access to the actual medicines, but then also if we're doing overkill with asking for these safes. One thing I didn't hear was the black market use, the illicit use. There are cartels out there that would use anything to make money, and so this is also a commodity. So I'm just wondering if anybody has thought about that, or other places that aren't Colorado that are interested in doing this and aren't as thorough with procedure and policy and are just like, hey, let's get something, try it out, see that works. And if we can put our foot into that realm, I'm just curious of some of the unknowns that are out there, but be respectful of what we're doing here. I just thought that, some of that information would be helpful because, even though it's not a high value commodity, it is a commodity that's also scarce out there. So I know there is some interest into it, not necessarily mainstream, but there is interest out there for it, and then access too. So my concern is, if somebody illegally wants to get this and can't so easily cultivate these things, is there a potential for black market use and abuse out there for these medicines? Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Nico?
Hello. I wanted to, first off, I just agree with a lot of the commentary already made around security requirements and not doing anything above what's already in the draft rules. On the diversion side, something that came to mind is it seems as though healing centers will have record keeping requirements around managing the actual medicine, the quantity of the medicine, how much is used in each session, any waste that happens, and they're required in those record keeping to store that data on premise within their healing center, but not required to report it anywhere, based on my understanding and reading of the rules, meaning that there could be diversion happening, and that their records could show that, but those may not be discoverable by regulators, unless there's some suspicion and they're asked for audit purposes. So I wonder if there's anything that could or should be done to actually require someone to report if they reconcile, if they reconcile their quantities and some is missing, are they required to report that anywhere? In my reading of the DOR draft rules, I don't see that they are, and I'm not sure how that works. So it seems to be a missing part, and I've made commentary on the DOR rules to that effect. But if that's not resolved, I wonder if there's anything that should be done on a local level.
Thanks, Nico. Any other comments on this topic?
This is Chris. I just had a quick thought about, I can't remember if we've discussed this already, but I wonder if what kind of regulation, if any, would be required if cultivators were, as far as security and for security purposes, cultivators of gourmet and functional mushrooms growing in the same location as growing psychedelic mushrooms. Often there's overlap in cultivation practices. So would the entire facility need to be surveilled according to the draft rules and the other federal requirements, or would it just be the area where the psychedelic medicine was being cultivated?
That's a good question. I think that will depend on how the state rules for cultivation facilities end up shaking out. So I'm not sure I can answer that, but that's a good question. All right. If there are no other thoughts, we'll move on. So I will turn it over to Molly to talk about cultivation practices.
All right, thanks, Abby. So I'll take us through the next couple of slides in the discussion. And as Abby said, we're going to talk about cultivation practices for this section. And so just to kind of recap, the Natural Medicine Division draft rules allow natural medicine cultivation facilities to cultivate, process, package, and label natural medicine, including inoculation, harvesting, and processing. So some of the things we're looking to hear from you all from are if you have any thoughts on what the expected size and scale of natural medicine cultivation facilities that may open in Denver, and then any associated risks that may exist within natural medicine cultivation facilities or as a part of cultivation practices. So thinking about things like risks to products, safety, worker health and safety, fire risks, that type of thing. And then finally, what, if any, risks there might be that are unique to or especially prevalent here in Denver that might be different than in other jurisdictions. So we'll open the floor for those to answer those types of questions.
Jacob, yeah, please.
Hey, Jacob Marlega here. I own and operate a gourmet mushroom farm in Denver. I guess to go into the first question posed, like the expected size and scale of cultivation facilities, I would say it depends more on like what the rules and bounds are set to. That mainly being just because like, I mean, I as a business owner and I know other business owners are going to want to expand their business as much as possible. So like, I don't know, the average size is going to kind of depend on what like the government sets rules as, I would assume. But as of like where it is right now, I mean, I think you're going to have everything from like a home grow scale level to probably thousands of square feet worth of warehousing. And then I guess I would also add like the average size specifically in Denver would probably be at the home grow scale. And that's just because like anyone who's going to have a sizable operation is going to probably move it outside of the city just due to cost mainly. Apart from that, like any risks that you know are going to come about like in terms of like the worker safety, the production and product safety, stuff like that. I think like regulations changing drastically is going to be probably the thing that affects like overall business on a day-to-day basis. Higher risks of employee theft, probably just because of like a valuable product. Operating heavy machinery, if it is a large scale production facility, HVAC failures coinciding with dramatically increased CO2 levels, as well as, I guess if you want to throw it in there, spore load, but that's probably less of a risk. And then I guess like any risk that would be unique to Denver, I would just say the lead pipes, honestly, just to like throw that one out there, but I can't really think of anything specifically for Denver. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. That's helpful.
Can I
Noah?
ask,
Oh,
I'm sorry. Sorry, can I ask a follow-up question? Just because I'm not as well versed, but as folks are answering this question, and Jacob, if you want to follow up, are they different if the cultivation practices are indoor or outdoor?
I assume it's probably going to be mostly indoor, just due to like control of your environment. That's like one of the main things in growing high quality fruit bodies. If you are going to do it outdoor in Colorado, you're going to have a hell of a time. It's way too dry and way too hot.
Awesome. Okay, Noah?
Thanks. So the size of the scale of the cultivation facilities can be a really big range. If we want to allow, for example, a therapist to be growing in their closet in their office building, it could be as little as 10 square feet, 1,000 square feet for a maybe a medium-sized facility, and a large scale could be about 100,000 square feet. And these numbers are kind of based off of what would need to be produced in order to give Coloradans access. So there's about 900,000 adults over 21 in Colorado that suffer from depression and anxiety. To give them all one good dose would be about 10,000 pounds annually. So we can kind of extrapolate what's needed, kind of starting with that number of 10,000 pounds that would need to be produced in order to supply everyone. The type of risks that would be involved in cultivation, the product safety, there's microbial contamination from the cultivation environment, poor hygiene practices from employees, and improper storage of the final product. Types of physical contamination could be the material that's used throughout the cultivation, such as the substrate. Also human hair or animal hair that's on people's clothes can get into the product. Chemical contamination, such as cleaning products that are used throughout a facility. And a small percentage of people are allergic to coconut. So a lot of people use products for the substrate that are come from coconut, so that could be a smaller risk. Some of the worker health and safety hazards can include heavy lifting, trip and fall hazards if things are stacked and tiered, spore and particulate inhalation from working in that environment and preparing the substrate, repetitive motion injuries, exposure to the possible microbial contamination or allergens, and burns related to the drying process or the sterilization process that's used. And that kind of also relates to fire risks. If there are lots of dehydrators or ovens or freeze dryers and pressurized sterilization equipment, that could create some hazards that employees would need to be trained properly on. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Noah. Carissa?
Yeah, I agree with most of what was already said. I'd also think that if we look at what are the current risks of gourmet mushroom farms and facilities, those are going to apply to cultivation facilities for psychedelic medicine. But like other two people said before me, it really depends. There's not a specific answer on the size. Cultivation of mushrooms can be very efficient if small spaces are maximized, and it all depends on what the need is. So if we're talking only about cultivation licenses for providing providers and healing centers with medicine, that's not gonna be like, that's very different than the amount you would turn out for, say, dispensary and retail sales. So it could be a space as small as a room, a garage, to large warehouses, depending on what those needs are. Also, keep in mind that, is it possible for healing centers they could have their own grow room in their own centers and provide everything they need for a year if they, if that were within the regulation and if they had interest and subject matter expertise in that. I assume that cultivators would also be looking for larger facilities in anticipation of the laws changing for recreational and personal legalization and retail. So that's something to consider. I think Jacob touched on that a little bit. As far as the risks, in addition to or including the risks of other food processing and urban food farming, as including mushrooms, those would apply. And depending on the grow, on the scale of the grow, there are fire risks, proper air ventilation, heavy equipment operation, humidification management. There could be grows in buildings where there's shared spaces. So humidification could cause mold in surrounding rooms or surrounding businesses. So that would need to be managed properly. That kind of goes with the HVAC. And obviously working with sharp tools and heavy supplies as well. And I think risks especially prevalent to Denver, I would say we should put some extra consideration into fire safety at these facilities. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Sorry, can you expand on that last one a little bit, Carissa, about the fire protection?
Sure. I mean, we live in a state where there are, extreme forest fires, where we've seen even in residential areas like the Marshall Fire. So just due to the climate, there's higher fire risk already. And with mushroom cultivation, we're often working with open flames, high heat in sterilization. And then of course, this also applies to like manufacturing, where it's even the fire risk is even increased when you're working with flammable solvents. Does that
Great.
clarify? Okay.
Any others on this slide? Got two more on cultivation, so. All right, we can always jump around a little bit too, but I'll go on to the next cultivation slide. Thanks, Abby. So this one, we're just curious to hear from you all on how can cultivation practices in licensed cultivation facilities honor and integrate the Native American indigenous origins of natural medicine. And then along those same lines, how should licensed cultivation facilities avoid misappropriating or exploiting the identity and cultural history of Native American and indigenous people within sacred traditions and practices? So just curious about if there's anything from either a programmatic or a regulatory perspective where we can recognize and honor that.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to what's there to be not exploitive. There's a fine line for that too. I like how there's a land acknowledgement, so something along those lines, acknowledging the origin and how this came to be would be good. People sometimes are unaware of how things get to in front of them, so having that background and history of that, and giving recognition to where this medicine came to being in front of this person would be good. And kind of want to keep that balance there too. Sometimes it's been communicated to me that some of the motifs and design in New Mexico is a little overkill with the Native American aesthetic. So I just want to keep that aware that, you know, there can be too much. And so, you know, having that balance would be good. But I think, you know, exploring the history and how this came to be and how it came here, while also recognizing, you know, Native American influence would be good. Um, and then also, I mean, the cultivation, you know, there's a lot to it. We believe, you know, the medicine is alive. It's a part of, you know, this whole world that we live into. And so keeping that would be good in kind of, you know, the cultivation. I want to just, you know, we're real clinical and, you know, rules and regulations. But you know, just having that note of, you know, hey, we're also cultivating, you know, live things. You know, having that mindset of, you know, we are, you know, doing good things with good medicine. That would be good. And probably, you know, cultivation, but it's hard trying to get somebody who is not in that mind state to try and to think that way. So just saying, you know, something towards that would be good. That's my input on it.
Thank you, Tom. Gabriella?
Yeah, I've talked, between myself and Carissa and Tom, we've talked extensively. As far as I know, we're the folks that have identified as Indigenous. And, there's a lot to say here that we've shared, that at least that I personally have shared a lot throughout the last couple of sessions that we've had, and just understanding how Proposition 122 came to be and how it happened, and the persistent erasure and the lack of adequate representation and the lack of representation at all. And so I just want to take it back to, there's no one here from the Mazatec traditions, from the Zapotec traditions. That's how this so-called psychedelic renaissance began. It began on the exploitation of Maria Sabina, a Mazatec woman, and the exploitation and the deceit that happened. And it was just a footnote in the mushroom policy framework that was one of our recommended readings here when psilocybin first became decriminalized a few years ago. So that continues to happen. It's continued to happen. I've personally have been in a lot of these meetings and testimony, and just continue to see how the absence of the people of these traditions are not here. And the people I know that the Indigenous and Religious Use Subcommittee is supposed to have representation by Native people, but they're also not of these traditions either. And so it's really important that we recognize that, Native people are not the same all across the board. There's Native traditions who this is their ancestral medicine, and there's many Native traditions that do not use entheogenic medicines or are not in relationship with them. And there's the first psilocybin is going to be phased in first, and then we have the different medicines. So it's important that they're not being all grouped together as Native people. We can speak for all Native people and for all of the natural medicines. So I will just continue to suggest that there needs to be a formal consultation process with the people of these specific traditions. And right now, we've mentioned this is damage control. This is not something that that the Zapotec and the Mazatec people had any formal consultation process, had any kind of community engagement, there was nothing of that nature that took place. And I understand that there is free, prior, and informed consent with sovereign tribal nations, and due to the systemic racism and oppression, the people of Mexico are not seen as federally recognized tribes, and therefore the government often tends to say that there is no formal process that needs to take place. And as a form of reparations, as a form of honoring your land acknowledgement, as a form of righting the present and historic harms, like I cannot I've expressed my uncomfortability in being asked these questions when there are no representation of these people. So continue to invest in that. This lawmaking process is almost at the end, and we have the federally recognized and Indigenous committee, that working group that just started meeting. And also there is no representation of people of the psilocybin traditions on there as well. So I would formally invest deeply in that consultation and community engagement process with these communities.
Thanks, Gabriella. Carissa?
Yeah, I could actually talk on this for a long time, so I lost my notes. I want to make sure that I pull them up so I don't get rambly. Here we go. I agree with what Gabriella said about representation. I think it's very important. For me personally, as an Indigenous person, it comes down to if you're not paying reparations directly to Indigenous peoples, then you shouldn't be doing it. You shouldn't be using it. You shouldn't be appropriating it. And that is a huge discussion and huge argument because the mass majority of people non-Native people do not understand the difference between appropriation and appreciation. So there is much education needed on this part of the licensing and regulation to honor Indigenous peoples in this area. I believe that, and people in my community believe that you must honor the land. I would just a few points on this would be in regard to cultivation, would be to minimize the use of toxic chemicals as those chemicals go back into our water and our soil systems. To utilize locally sourced grains and substrates, to have care for waste management. A couple of examples would be keeping as much waste material out of the landfill as possible, returning natural materials to the earth and enhancing those systems if possible. I wonder if we, meaning the city, state, county, could fund facilities that take the used grow bags, which are made of plastic, and could we fund facilities that take that waste and break them down using plastic eating fungi and investing into those kinds of research? And that kind of speaks to sustainability as well. What if cultivators had to do some of this themselves? What if they had a section in their facility where they break down and compost using plastic eating fungi to reduce their plastic waste? And I'm bringing up plastic waste because I've noticed that as mushroom cultivation grows, the cultivators tend to move more away from reusable materials to disposable materials. And what I've been hearing is it just takes too much to clean the reusable materials. So what are some other systems we can put in place to sustainably protect land from toxins and plastic waste? Finally, reparations to Indigenous people and communities is super important here if we're talking about how do we honor Native American and Indigenous people in our cultivation. There are many ways this can happen. This could be a tax, this could be prioritization on licensing, waivers, grants. It could be funding cultivation facilities for Indigenous growers who are connected to their tribes. And this is where I get really concerned about equity, especially when it comes to the rental prices for facilities. That is one of the key factors that create inaccessible business for cultivation. As far as misappropriating or exploiting identity, I like, just to be frank, I don't know how to say this any other way, but like, if you are not a shaman, curandero, a medicine person, you're not that just because you grow magic mushrooms. That doesn't make you a chief or, you know, a holy person. Education on not just the history of medicine, but how appropriations of this culture of the medicine has killed, disenfranchised, incarcerated Indigenous people, harmed, and about the continuous negative effect on Indigenous people. Could there be continued education that is designed and supported by Indigenous educators and medicine people on cultural awareness and equity? Could that be a requirement to obtain a license, but also to renew licenses? Those are my thoughts when it comes to the Indigenous appropriation regarding cultivation.
Thank you so much, Carissa. Those were really helpful suggestions and ideas. Noah?
I agree with Carissa that we should require minimum hours of education courses led by recognized tribal leaders who are paid through the licensing fees. And as far as the misappropriating or exploiting, I think that we shouldn't allow any wording, images, or references of the practices without written permission from a recognized tribal leader. I think it's important that we don't exploit any of this stuff, but I do think it's important that we are educated from directly from the source. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. Jacob?
Yeah, hey, I would say like more than likely it's not gonna honor Indigenous folks. I hate to say that, but I feel like any form of cultivation of this medicine isn't gonna do any justice to honoring anyone. I don't know how we go about making that right, other than you either allow it and you get over it, or you don't allow it and you get over it. I believe that even like just the growing of them in and of themselves is already kind of dishonoring it. And that those who came before us, they would have like wild harvested it and it would have meant more in that way, but it already means less because humans are cultivating it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Gabriella?
Yeah, I just want to say, kind of echo Carissa's bringing in about the education piece. You know, of course, there's many ideas that can come about in form of reparations, and there's also really large systemic things of, you know, I've mentioned how the Sand Creek Massacre has not been allowed to be part of some of the school curriculum, and how much of the history and the contemporary situation of Native people and different, and in general, right? Every community, every tribal nation is deeply impacted in so many different ways. And the education piece is really, really important. And but the way to do that when it's meaningful and genuine will come from that consultation and that community engagement piece with the different Native communities, in this case specifically with the Mazatec traditions. And I disagree with your comment, Jacob, because this whole thing is inherently inequitable. It's inherently yeah, it is dishonoring to the people of these traditions, and it's not something that we need to get over. It's something that, in this case, we've have to push into harm reduction and something that is inherently causing and creating so much harm. And with doing that consultation process, then we can find, you know, they can suggest ways that are more respective to the medicine, that are more honoring of the medicine. And that benefit is for the ultimately everyone that is in relationship and consuming and healing with these medicines. So I would just ask folks to respect that, you know, to not say it's something, please do not tell our communities to get over something like that. And please do not speak for our communities or misrepresent them.
Okay, thanks, Gabriella. Any other thoughts on this slide before we move on? Tristan, go ahead. Tristan, did you mean to raise your hand?
Sorry, I dropped my hand but didn't unmute. I just have a general question to the group. So is there a separation between the actual traditional practices and then the molecule itself? And how those should be treated? I don't have answers, just something that came to my mind.
Elaborate more, the actual molecule and the traditional.
Yeah, so there's practices that are associated with actually giving the molecule, the medicine, whatever it is, and that's one thing. But then there's the existence of something like psilocybin, and I'm wondering if those are inherently intertwined or if there's a separation between the practices and the molecule itself. I'm curious because it seems like we're talking about both together, and there might be a discussion that they're separate.
We generally look at it as one, you know, it's medicine, it's there, it's one, it's good. It's, you know, you guys look at it white man way, there's drugs in it, there's a molecule, there's, you know, money to be made. We look at all as one thing.
Tristan, are you kind of referring to like the possibility of a synthetic molecule?
No, I'm saying that the existence of like psilocybin might exist throughout the world. It is not specific to one specific area, but then there are definitely practices that have been practiced for hundreds of years by specific groups of individuals who are clearly being left out of many conversations and have been for those same hundreds of years. I'm questioning if those two things are always inherently intertwined, or if that there can be discussion around the fact that a mushroom can be cultivated, and as long as it doesn't touch the actual practices that were actually sensitive, that are tied to individual cultures, if those can actually be viewed separately.
I think it's possible, but like Tom said, you know, many Indigenous people, we think of this as all connected. And we wouldn't even be having this conversation if there wasn't a vast history of exploitation and harm done by the appropriation, right? Appropriating culture and appropriating medicine for profit. So it's like we're working with a reparative. I believe that we are working with a reparative structure. We're trying to build a reparative structure due to, unfortunately, you know, decades and decades of past harm. So that's what, for me, brings it together as far as the connection between the actual compound in the mushroom, right? The psychoactive properties and the fungi itself, and the medicinal, spiritual, and cultural practices. So if we hadn't had all of that, right? If Maria Sabina hadn't ultimately been killed, and then, you know, this conversation would be a lot different. If we didn't have oppressed Native American people and our land stolen and our babies stolen and then continued oppression, we wouldn't be having the same conversation as we are right now. But we are in this all connected conversation because of those things. And I believe that what we're trying to do in this group is do better by everyone, right? By all of our ancestors, regardless of where they stand on that.
Cool, and I think that's exceptionally helpful background, and I appreciate that. You know, I wonder if there's discussion where there's kind of two sides, right? There's the reparative, and then there's the making sure that we honor and don't sort of step on specific practices. And I feel like maybe those are two different conversations that both warrant significant amounts of discussion. but it might be helpful to view them as two different things, right? So
Yeah,
like, I think there's a
yeah.
very, very immediate need to, like, I love the points around, you shouldn't just call yourself a shaman because you like mushrooms and like, do some psychotherapy, right? I view that as one. And then there's also the other side of like, can we set aside, are there programs that can be created for education? Or, I love some of the points that, it was Gabriella that made around, just making sure that we don't start doing practices that further harm nature, right? Like make sure these toxic chemicals don't find their way back into land. So I just view them as two different conversations, and I think it'd be helpful because some people are going to be more amenable to either of them. And sometimes it's helpful not to blend things because you get further. So I just wanted to kind of have that conversation, but thanks for the
Yeah, thank you for that clarity, because I guess after that comment, I do see that there could be space for discussion around, use and facilitation and providing the medicine and where it comes from and how do we honor Native American people and Indigenous peoples, but also the practices, the cultural and spiritual practices that these are often connected with. We see it here in Denver, right? We have a group of white women who are doing traditional Indigenous practices with natural medicine, and yet Indigenous people don't even have access. So like, I think that there is space for that specific conversation as well. And I think that we need to see the bigger picture too from Indigenous perspectives. Thank you for that.
Great discussion, everybody. Gabriella?
I may just have a small comment, that some of the things that we've heard of, there's when you're extracting something, then you can patent it, right? And this may or may not apply to Colorado, but as we understand some of the strains that are going to be used in several of the healing centers is taken in a very deceitful way from the Oaxacan communities without their consent, without their consultation, and without any of that reciprocity or any of those reparations going back to the community. So I understand what you're asking too, and some of these are inextractable from the overall big picture of the exploitation. This whole entire thing, this whole entire bill is quite literally the co-opting of Native traditions. And whereas we hear, well, the elders really wanted to share, well, they wanted to share for people's healing, but not for then that to be extracted and commodified in entire businesses and a whole entire state legislation to be built off of that. So all of this inherently exploits Indigenous communities. I would say that yes, mushrooms do grow all over the world, but the specific traditions that are being extracted here and most impacted, and especially because for Native people, they're, at least the way that my community see this, is that the border is still is a way to divide, North America versus South America and Mexico. But Indigenous knowledge is like, well, they're still deeply, deeply connected, and we're on their homelands, right? So we're on the homelands of these traditions. And well, I forgot my last point, but yeah, it's a much deeper conversation for sure. And hopefully I remember my last point, but for now, that's it.
I can always come back to you if you remember it. Okay, any other thoughts on this slide before we move on? Okay.
Okay, so I think some of this has already been brought up, but we'll just cover these again real quick, or to elaborate on some of them. We just want to talk about kind of the environmental impacts and also some sustainability practices. So what environmental impacts might natural medicine cultivation have, and what impacts might be unique to or especially prevalent specifically here in Denver? And then are there any sustainable best practices for natural medicine cultivation that we should be aware of and discuss? And then should licensed natural medicine cultivations be required to meet those local sustainability standards And if so, what would that look like and what should those sustainability standards entail? Any thoughts on that piece?
And thanks to all the suggestions that you've already given that some things wasn't even aware about, so.
Jacob, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hey. So in terms of like the environmental impacts, I guess I got a few things written down. The number one substrate source that or like substrate ingredient that people are using currently to cultivate psilocybin mushrooms is coco coir, which is coconut husk and definitely not grown in Colorado. So that's being sourced and transported from elsewhere around the globe. And I'm sure like that transport would be a negative environmental impact. On top of that, everybody's aware of like plastic bags, the polypropylene plastic bags and how they're used in the industry and that it's an ever growing thing because yeah, you save on your labor cost. On top of that, I guess you could like this is on like a flip side of things, like you can compost the substrate. So that would be kind of like a carbon neutral or positive type thing that we could do as companies who are growing mushrooms. To help facilitate and kind of like make things better because it's definitely more negative than it is positive. And then just like on top of that, the overall mental health of humankind is going to get better. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt as well. I guess in terms of like the most sustainable best practices, I guess, you know, I'm curious to like what we mean by that. Like what like detailed of an answer are you looking for? Because you can, you know, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Like you can figure it out in like a ton of different ways on like what you would do. It just kind of depends on what the rules that you're setting forward would be to, I guess, figure that out. And then I guess in terms of like the local standards for sustainability or whatever, I would say just like do whatever's in the food industry already. That way, like we're not having to rewrite the code or anything. I feel like if you're ingesting a product already, that's kind of already written down and we should just go with what they're already doing because I don't really know what other sustainability practices we would really need to enforce. Yeah, that's basically all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Carissa?
I've been providing a lot of comment. I just put my hand up to get on the stack, but if anybody else would like to go before me who hasn't spoken yet, please take the mic. Nope. Okay. So my comments on environmental impacts, I'm concerned that cultivation facilities will pop up in areas where people already suffer from corporate and industrial pollution. You know, the Suncor area can be a good example. These areas tend to have higher populations of poor people and people of color. I'm concerned that natural medicine cultivation and manufacturing industry will deepen and further their suffering there. This is why I think that it is critical that the city council and the mayor closely review and consider Colorado State Environmental Justice Act, which is House Bill 21-1266, when making decisions on licensing for these facilities. As far as sustainable best practices for cultivation, I mentioned this a little earlier. In my experience in research and in community, I've come to understand that the larger the grow, the less sustainable and environmentally conscious the operation becomes. But here is where I can see an opportunity for governments, communities, and cultivators to invest and support land and water healing with mushroom mycelium, as well as advancing research in plastic-eating fungi and toxic removing fungi. There is no reason why cultivators and we in this community can't enhance our environments as we are exploiting it. I don't see how we can't live in symbiotic relationship with community and land through natural medicine cultivation. I'm currently bringing these efforts into my own work as far as land-based healing projects through mushroom and mycelium cultivation. I would love to discuss this further with anybody here in this group or any of the public that are watching. If anybody's interested in that research and growing that to propose to our own governments. I also think that the food safety regulations could be a really good guide here. And I wonder if, I'm not trying to call you out, but I wonder if Val or someone from CASER could at some point provide a quick review of local sustainability standards. And, you know, how is a psychedelic mushroom different, or cultivation of the psychedelic mushrooms different than other food cultivation in the Denver area? And I'd like to discuss that further sometime too. Just real quickly in regard to the comment about using a coconut husk. So that is the standard in psychedelic mushroom cultivation. However, it's not the only thing. Like there are lots of wild psychedelic mushrooms that grow in the United States where we do not grow coconuts. And they grow all over the world where coconuts are not grown. Coco coir is used because it is efficient and it's easy to get and it's cheap. And so, you know, can we invest in research in more sustainable substrate practices? And that's just one example, like substrate being one example, and keeping it kind of closer to home, because the transport of those materials highly affect our environment as well. That's all I have.
Thank you so much, Carissa. Noah?
So I have a couple of quick comments on some possible best sustainable practices for cultivation. The first one is being able to utilize all parts of the mushroom and the waste through extraction. And also, as Jacob said, being able to compost or recycle the cultivation, grow media, substrate, or tools or bags that are used in the grow process. Thank you.
Gabriella, I saw your hand was raised. Are you still interested in adding anything?
Yeah, and I feel like for the most part, you know, Carissa and with your expertise in environmental justice and, you know, myself, I don't work so much at the policy level, a big learning curve, but we've mentioned a lot of our concerns the last couple of meetings. So I would just continue to go back to those and, you know, some of those concerns we've already just deeply mentioned, the gentrification, the concerns of the already overburdened communities, especially communities of color, and then the impacts on the water and the soil and the air quality. So I just lowered my hand because we've talked about those concerns extensively, but I just want to kind of double down on that as well. And just kind of it's challenging because someone here mentioned, you know, that they're going to want to expand their grow practice as much as possible. And just that's more of probably around the education piece as well, is that this is inherently already a commercialization, a commodification of the sacred substance. So, you know, maybe some education around how we can minimize that this isn't about money. This is shifting the narrative a little bit. You know, it's not about healing the masses. These medicines aren't for everybody. They are extremely helpful and beneficial when used in a good way, but how do we move, you know, kind of the bigger overall picture is moving away from an extractivist exploitative lifestyle. And so being mindful that this isn't happening here in the cultivation and the manufacturing as well. So I don't have a solution other than like, let's if we can move away from how can we grow as much as possible and maximize our profits, to how can we really bring in this much needed healing for people in an equitable way that isn't further contributing to the already the growing climate crisis that we're embarking on.
Thanks, Gabriella. Jacob?
Hey, thank you. I guess I would just like to add personally, just to clear it up. I'm not in it for profit. I'm in it for just being able to do it. And I think just the fact that I can is a cool thing. And then just like a random side note that kind of goes along lines, like we live in a capitalistic society. I hate to say it, but like apart from me, there's going to be someone else who like wants to stick their hands in it. So you might as well like uplift those who want to be stewards in this industry and not just are out for the dollar value.
Thanks, Jacob. All right. I do want to keep us on schedule. So unless anybody has other thoughts on this slide, I think we're going to have Erica up next to talk about manufacturing. And these questions will look substantially similar, but they are obviously separate processes and practices. So we want to give them each their due discussion.
Yes, absolutely. And apologies in advance if I have an internet issue. Abby knows that she can pick right up, but if you see me freeze, apologies. It's been happening intermittently, but so moving on to manufacturing, right? This is a general term that we're using. It's a very, to think about it from a, Western versus, or not versus, but a Western perspective and the Indigenous perspective, right? Manufacturing invokes a lot of different feelings. But for our purposes here, right, we're talking about anything that could be classified by this as the definition under state law, right? So taking the cultivated product and turning it into something else, whether that is, whatever process that entails. We'll use words like extracting, but I did want to kind of just introduce the topic by noting and recognizing that some of these terms may have meanings that, people perceive differently. And that doesn't mean we're leaning toward one or another. It's just an easy way to have the conversation that is such a big conversation in a small time. So with that, we'll dive into the questions. So the Natural Medicine Division draft rules allow natural medicine manufacturing facilities to extract psilocybin and manufacture natural medicine products. So some questions that we want to talk about, same with cultivation, right? What are people expecting the size and scale of natural medicine manufacturing facilities that may open? What are the risks that may exist in, in the manufacturing facilities or as part of the manufacturing processes? Again, looking at risks to product safety, worker health, fire risks, et cetera. And then are there any risks that may be unique or especially prevalent given what folks are wanting to do or the situations and circumstances that are prevalent here in Denver. So I'll open it up for any thoughts or questions or answers here. Yeah, no.
Okay, so the expected size of manufacturing facilities could probably range from as small as 200 square feet to 10,000 square feet, depending on the type of process and products that are being utilized. Some of the risks involved at the manufacturing level for product safety, microbial contamination from poor storage methods or poor personal hygiene practices, physical contamination from manufacturing packaging and other supplies, as well as human hair or animal hair that's on someone's clothes, chemical contaminations from solvents that are used during extraction or chemicals that are used to clean the facility, exposure to allergens, such as coconut that's used during cultivation or other ingredients that are used in the natural medicine product. Worker health and safety risks include heavy lifting, trip and fall hazards, injuries that are typical in any kitchen, packaging equipment injuries from stickering or boxing machines, particulate inhalation from dry powdered mushroom that's in the air, repetitive motion injuries, and possible exposure to microbial contaminations that are on the biomass. And fire risks would include different types of heating equipment that's used in the kitchen, as well as heating equipment that is used in the extraction process, and if allowed, any flammable solvents that are used during extraction. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. Tom?
One thing I was curious about that I have not heard about is copywriting, like on the genetic level. Are there any like GMOs? Are they looking at trying to, you know, clone this and copyright it so that only they can be the ones that can grow this? I don't know if any discussion was had for that. That was one topic I was interested in, and if there was any talk about that. And then the other part was the marketing and you know, where these areas are. Some communities are real vocal about what they have in their community, so I wanted to know if there was like a effort towards getting the message out there, like, hey, you know, these medicine places are going to be in your neighborhood. You know, and just if there was any foresight in that, and then also on the end part, doing all this and, you know, codifying it and getting it down to a clinical level where a manufacturer has any thought gone around of any diseases that may come from doing this. And, you know, just like bananas, you know, if there's a disease that kills all of them, well, what happens then? If I was just curious if anything had been thought about that. You know, if we're large scale manufacturing this, there could be a potential for some kind of pathogen to come out of this that would, you know, intentionally um, be focused towards it. So I was just curious on some of these questions.
Yeah, great questions, Tom. A lot to think about there. I think I'm not sure about the copywriting question. That's certainly one to look into. And one that we'd like, you know, more feedback on if other people have thoughts. As far as outreach and education, I think that's a great suggestion to do some outreach to communities where these businesses might locate. And I think that's a topic that we plan to address in our next meeting, just talking about community input on where these businesses locate and what kinds of businesses. And I will let Michael go next in case he has anything to add or also has any answers to your questions. Michael?
Great, thank you. I actually just wanted to provide a little bit of color around what Noah was saying in terms of health and safety risks when it comes to extraction. I think important considerations are going to be the OSHA rules around exposure to solvents. You know, it depends on the solvent, you know, the rule itself depends on the solvent, and the actual occupational safety standards depend on the solvent that's being used, but effectively, you know, no matter what solvent is being used, the OSHA standards should be followed. In addition to fire code standards, there is a national fire code that's the NFPA. Chapter 38 relates to marijuana growing, processing, or extraction facilities, and lays out the specific fire code related to extraction processes that do use flammable solvents. So I do believe that it would be important to make sure that it's specified that if there are any flammable materials being used, that the facility is up to code from the NFPA Chapter 38 code perspective.
Thanks, Michael. That's helpful. Jacob?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, kind of go into Tom's question about like genetics and or people who might be like trademarking or registering them or whatever, patenting can't remember his exact verbiage, but I mean, people right now are already doing crazy things with the genetics of psilocybe cubensi. Like they're cloning mutated, gross looking things that don't even look like mushrooms and are growing them. And there's a new name and a new strain that comes out every other day. When someone trademarks it or patents it or whatever is probably just only a matter of time and them figuring out how to get through those processes. I'm personally not, so just to add that tidbit in there, but you know, there are people out there who are doing wacky, crazy things.
Thanks, Jacob. Any other thoughts or input on this slide? Okay, we will move on.
All right. Similar to the conversation that we had around cultivation, and to echo Gabriella's comment about, I know that a lot of you have brought these issues up in previous meetings, right? But wanted to be sure to ask specifically when it comes to manufacturing, how can manufacturing practices in licensed manufacturing facilities honor and integrate the Native American and Indigenous origins of natural medicine? And how should any licensed manufacturing facilities avoid misappropriating or exploiting the identity and cultural history of Native American and Indigenous people within sacred traditions and practices? Go ahead, Noah.
For manufacturing, I have the same comment as for the cultivation licenses, that there should be a required minimum hours of education led by officially recognized tribal leaders who are paid through the licensing fees, and making manufacturers or anyone who's handling the natural medicine have that minimum required education. And same with the exploiting, really making sure that any wording or images or references that are related have been reviewed and approved with written permission from any of the related tribal leaders. Thank you.
Thanks. Carissa?
Erica, I would just like it to be noted that my comments on cultivation practices, I think most, if not all of them, also apply to manufacturing care. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think, right, I know it's repetitive, but at the same time, we want to make sure that each gets their own discussion. And if the considerations are the same, that's good for us to know. If there are any that differ, that's good for us to know as well. So thank you for that.
I think the risks that I think it was Noah who went kind of deeper into the risks and the fire hazards and safety risks. There are some that apply to manufacturing, maybe more than cultivation, but I think that would be the biggest difference here.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, not seeing any other hands raised, so we can move on.
All right. Again, if these are the same and you want to reflect that, happy to note. But what environmental impacts might natural medicine extraction and or manufacturing processes have? What are some sustainable best practices for natural medicine extraction and manufacturing? And should any licensed manufacturing facilities be required to meet local sustainability standards? And if so, what should those standards entail? Go ahead, Noah.
So for the environmental impacts, if solvent extraction is allowed, then any flammable waste would need to be handled, stored, recycled, and disposed of properly, and having all the employees properly trained. The best sustainable practices would be to be able to compost or recycle any spent biomass, as well as being able to reuse and recycle the extraction solvents, and really to point out that being able to utilize all parts of the mushroom and the waste from cultivation in order to make clean, accurately dosed products through extraction is important to be able to be sustainable and to create affordable products for the consumer. And as Michael mentioned earlier, the NFPA regulations should be followed. For anyone that's using a flammable solvent, as well as any OSHA safety requirements. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on? All right. Well, thanks all for the discussion on cultivation and manufacturing. And as always, please feel free to follow up with written comments, or if there's any written resources that you think we should be aware of, please do feel free to send those to us. So next we'll jump into a conversation about marketing and advertising. I will say it's currently 3:33. I think we want to stop at 3:50 and give members of the public a chance to make public comments. So just bear that in mind. We might have to save some of this discussion for our next meeting, but we can get started on it now. Senate Bill 23-290, the General Assembly declared that considerable harm may occur to the federally recognized American tribes and indigenous people, communities, cultures, and religions if natural medicine is overly commodified, commercialized, and exploited in a manner that results in the erasure of important cultural and religious context. So bearing that legislative intent in mind, the state natural medicine draft rules for marketing and advertising require that natural medicine businesses, their products or services shall not be marketed in a way that misappropriates or exploits the identity or cultural history of federally recognized American tribes or indigenous people, their community, culture, or religions. So what we want to hear from you all is, first of all, what kinds of marketing, advertising, public relations, branding, or other types of promotions could be considered misappropriation or exploitative? We want to understand from you, what does that look like in practice? What could that look like? And then secondly, we want to understand from you all if you think that Denver should address this issue further or with more specificity. And if so, what additional guidance or restrictions would you recommend that we put into place? The floor is open. Yeah, Noah, go ahead.
I think it's been mentioned a few times that, you know, some of these, this information should be coming directly from tribal leaders to get some guidance on what they consider to be misappropriate and exploitative. So if there's anybody that, you know, can help reach out to those people or get them more involved, I think that's going to be really important.
Thanks, Noah. Carissa?
I find this section in the conversation kind of, I guess, like difficult, because I think that there are multiple things that kind of feed into this. And one of those, like, first and foremost, like, how will this be even enforced? You know, if there is marketing material with, say, an indigenous chief or holy man wearing a traditional headdress as part of their marketing, right? And indigenous people somehow report this as misappropriation, as we have and continue to do so for sports team mascots, for other kinds of appropriations, and nothing happens, right? How, like, why are we asking this question knowing that it won't be enforced or that there is no structure behind that? That's kind of where my initial thoughts are with this. But to actually address, so I think that's important to note, but to actually address the questions, things like the CBD shaman come to mind, and we already kind of discussed this earlier about using words pertaining to specific statuses and positions within tribal culture. Those should definitely be avoided. I don't think that companies should market or advertise as providing indigenous medicine, or even market or advertise as like a Colorado native company. We see that with beer, we see that with food, we see that on people's Instagrams who are not native saying that they're Colorado natives. I don't think that they should market or advertise or to claim and include titles of chief, medicine man or woman, shaman, curandero, curandera, and so on. And if they are not, if the companies are not in fact owned by, operated by Indigenous people and continuously rooted in Indigenous wisdom and practices, they should not claim to be an Indigenous owned, operated company at all. This also includes tokenization. You can't hire an Indigenous person to take out your trash and then tell people that you're an Indigenous operated company. We see that a lot in business. And I think these are some things that, just some brief examples of like what this looks like. And we see it everywhere. So, if we could somehow avoid that, but then this brings it back to one, education being necessary. And I think myself and Gabriela and Noah have been advocating a lot for that in this meeting. And two, of how will this be enforced at all? Thank you.
Thank you, Carissa. And those are, those are the exact types of examples that I think we want to hear from you all about. Obviously, the rule that's on the slide here is incredibly subjective and it's vague. And so I think what we are hoping to do is potentially put a little bit more specificity around it. And how that looks, I think, how it's enforced depends on how the law is written. But typically, I'll just use, we have local restrictions for marijuana advertising, and I go into a little bit more detail about those on our next slides. But typically how it works is if somebody sees, for example, you can't advertise marijuana on a billboard in Denver. And so if somebody sees marijuana advertised on a billboard in Denver, they can complain, they can submit a complaint to us, and our investigations team investigates that complaint. And then if they find the complaint to be valid, they can take enforcement action, and that can range from a notice of violation, it can be a fine, and then multiple violations could result in action against the license. So that's a very high level overview of how enforcement would work. But I think in order for us to enforce, we need just more information about what this could look like. And so that's really what we're hoping to get from you all. So thank you, I appreciate it. Gabriela?
Yeah, I just want to appreciate Carissa's comment. Like, you really hit it spot on. And this is not just something that we see in regards to this medicines. It's actually just, it's everywhere. It's in greenwashing, it's in environmental justice work, it's in DEI work, it's in higher academia, it's in just, it's pervasive, this tokenization of Black and Brown people, especially Indigenous people. And actually that's how this whole bill was passed, with the tokenization of a Native woman. So yeah, I'm really curious also, and would love to hear how it will be enforced, especially as we see that legislation and policy work and punitive measures don't tend to favor or support Native people. In fact, they support their criminalization. And so there's systemic issues all throughout this question. And I wanted to go back to Noah's comment with mentioning, recognized tribal leaders, that the and this is kind of highlighting what we see in general, right? What I've mentioned is that not all Native cultures are the same. And so in this particular with the psilocybin traditions, I've heard that there's some federally, like very few federally recognized American tribes. Again, I don't know how have the full information, but the traditions and the Native communities are from Mexico, so they don't have any federal recognition here. So I want to make that distinction of, yes, talk to the leaders and talk to these communities, but with that awareness that they may not be federally recognized. So I know that the system kind of tends to think of we only want to talk to federally recognized peoples, but we have to recognize that the traditions of these medicines many of them are not from federally recognized tribes, so we can't participate in the erasure of that. And even though they may not have that quote unquote status of federal recognition, they deserve that respect and the courtesy to be consulted with as if they were. And also what means with that is that they have the legitimate power to say no and to consult and have those legal rights that federally recognized tribes do have. And yeah, I also want to make sure that people are not, as people are getting these DNA tests and saying, okay, it's very vague, like you're 50% Native American, that they're not using that as a way, if in the future, and this is like thinking long term, that they're not using that to say they are Colorado Native or using that to get some grants or whatever is possible for the reparations process to have access to benefits that takes away from those benefits from bona fide Indigenous communities. And that's long drawn out. Some of the wording here that I saw on the previous slide was part of the creation or the purpose of the federally recognized and Indigenous working group. So also making sure we're deferring to that they're unfortunately just started meeting, but I'm sure that they will also develop some of these recommendations around the exploitation and minimizing the harm. And I'm sure that marketing and advertising will be included in that. And I would support Denver addressing the issue further if that's what Native communities are asking for. And I would support it. I'm supportive of that, especially when it means furthering the protection that the communities are asking for.
Thank you, Gabriela. Tom?
I just like to note, Native communities are really traumatized historically, generationally. And so, that's why a lot of these things are coming up because of the intersection of, not only our culture, our ways, our medicines. And that's why it's good that, we're thinking in these spaces. And so me being a Native American with a tribal ID, which is required by the United States in order to be, quantified as a tribal member, the US government requires this. Okay, so just so everybody knows that. And that would be a good starting place of how we make this. Are you a Native American? Okay, do you have a tribal ID? Okay. There are some inconsistencies and some issues with that. We're trying to not be quantified or pedigreed that way. So, that may be something that may not be around for a while, but a lot of people are not happy with being pedigreed and having, blood quantum. How much Indian are you is exactly the question. And so that brings back all the way to this, this trauma that we have, and I feel, being a Native American and being the target of assimilation policies, save the man, kill the Indian. We fought hard to keep our ways, and we fought our ways. We're very secretive in what we share. We shared a lot of our medicines to be commercialized, tobacco, aspirin. These are all examples of what happened. And so now our attitude is we are here to be equal partners. We are sovereign nations, and we don't share much of what we do. And And so because of the past policies of, the United States, we don't share our ceremonies and what we do. And because of that, we know that, these mushrooms are illegal. And so we're not going to put our place in a way that, adds additional scrutiny. So I wanted to put that there. There are Native American tribes which use this mushroom, not necessarily for a traditional way. There are also hunting ways. There are also rules of rites of passage. There are also grieving ceremonies that this is used, but we don't share this because we know that you guys can come in and tell us not to do this anymore. Again, we can only practice our religion beginning in 1979, so there's a lot of trauma here. There's a lot of not a lot of trust in any government system here. And so I am trying to meet everybody in the middle because, as stated earlier in this meeting, we have to get over it. And that has been the attitude of everybody. You lost your land and you get over it. You suffer all these kind of things that happen to your people, high unemployment, high suicide rate, high diabetes, all these things. I could pick many things that affect our community. We're just supposed to get over it. And so today I'm here to offer what, my people, my Native American people. I'm Northern Arapaho. I'm a descendant of Sand Creek Massacre. And I want to just stay right now, having this conversation is very charged. There's a lot of privilege here. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're all aware of that and that, moving forward, this is very uncomfortable spaces for people of color. Regardless, we're still here. We are sovereign nations and we want to be cognizant and aware of how we're perceived. One, two, how we use our medicine and how our culture is used. We don't want it to be exploited. There's a big rule of, people south of, the United States border. We are open. We accept people into our cultures, into our reservations. But then there's also, territory, let's say. You're coming into our land, you're coming into our ways, and so we're respectful of people in other ways, other tribes. But again, we want to have that sovereignty and understand, this land that we're on, belong to Native Americans, not necessarily in culture or Western view, but we're stewards of this land and stewards of the medicine and steward of our tribe. And so, again, I just want to be aware of, all the things that have been said, have been going on. Even just talking this could be misappropriation and exploitative. So, I just wanted to say, that we're addressing these things, having these hard discussions. And, this is really important part, the branding. I think whoever is the lead, the state Department of Regulations, they need to be the ones that are going forward and are putting this stamp on it. This is whatever department, whoever is in charge, whoever's the top, who makes these rules needs to put forward. Like, this is our initiative with, community support. And, the marketing needs to be very tasteful. It can't be overdone like some of the marketing in New Mexico, saturated with, icons of Native American motifs. We are modern. So we're also trying to fight, all of these kind of stereotypes. We don't live in teepees. We still practice our ways, but we're lawyers, we're doctors. I'm sitting right here right now. I'm a system administrator. It's end of fiscal year. I live in this world. I have to survive in this world, but I'm also Native American. And I come from a traditional world. I come from a world where we believe in, nature. We believe in, our ways are and how we are. So I live in multiple worlds. And so again, I'm trying to be the bridge here and make sure that, we're all heard. But again, too, it comes back down to, honoring, the tribes and the people who use this. And, being Native American, Sac and Fox, Northern Arapaho, and Yuchi, I have a lot of connections in, Indian country. And there are various tribes who use this, but aren't comfortable saying that they use this. And so, again, it goes back to, south of the border. They don't even recognize Native people as citizens. So again, when they come here, they see, you know, how America treats Native American tribes, they also, you know, want that recognition. So I can hear people down south, you know, too. So there's a lot of work to be done on many aspects and many intersections of, you know, Native communities and culture. And so this is a very tiring work. So I just wanted to say, you know, I'm grateful to be here to offer this input and how we're going to move forward. Again, too, I echo, you know, what, you know, was said earlier. It's going to happen, you know, and, you know, instead of just getting over it, let's discuss rules. Let's discuss, you know, how both sides can come to, you know, a consensus, because that is the Indian way. We're about bartering. We're about getting along with tribes to a point. To a point, we did have natural enemies, natural tribes that did not get along, and so I'm just bringing that, you know, that kind of attitude towards here. You know, we all have to live. We all have to coexist. So I just wanted to put that forward and just say, you know, we're doing good work, but more needs to happen. And I'm grateful just to say this. And, you know, this is very important because our image is out there. When people come to me, they ask me things that they see on TV about buffaloes, about teepees, about flutes, all these things that are in, you know, the mainstream media, not anything about, you know, computers, not anything about law, not anything about any of the other things that I, you know, spent most of my life learning to navigate this quote unquote white man's world. So I just thought I'd put that out there and, you know, kind of set, you know, what I'm seeing here and what I think should happen, you know, with this, with these recommendations.
Thanks, Tom. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for such a great discussion. We're going to skip our last couple of slides and questions just for the sake of time, but we'll save them for our next meeting. And we did send them out with the agenda. So if you have thoughts that you had ready to share and you'd like to just email those to us, please feel free. We're going to move to public comment. If anybody in the audience would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. There's one hand raised, so we'll start with Bohan Farrell. And if you could please limit your comment to 2 minutes. We are running a little short on time, so we'd appreciate it. Bohan? We are not able to hear you. So we can come back to you. Any other folks interested in making a public comment, please feel free to raise your hand. Lizette?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, you know, I've been sitting here listening to you guys discuss this, and I know there is a lot of questions about the exploitation of Native American traditions, and I just want to make sure that you know, you understand that America is the continent, not just the country. Native Americans are people from Mexico too, people that have had many millennials using these medicines. And all these laws are being done or are being taken in a way that somehow the United States can dictate how the exploitation and extraction of these resources can happen from other countries. However, there is really no people in your boards that are representing these people. The US has federally recognized tribes, and that's good. And that's also part of colonialism. Tom is right in saying that this whole pedigree thing, there's only 3 kinds of beings in this world that are defined by the pedigree piece. It's Native Americans, horses, and dogs. And nobody else does. And there are many people that are Native Americans that fell through the cracks through boarding schools, through adoptions to other people, including a lot of Mexican people that lived here before the borders existed. Now the borders are here, and somehow all of these traditions of these medicines that are being legalized in this city are not from here. They are from down south, but there is no recognition for that. I also want to address the get over it part, because that is just incredibly insensitive. I understand we live in a capitalistic society and we are all suffering from it, but there are people that are suffering more than white people. And Carissa and Gabriela and several people talk about the inequalities in all of this. So I have that question as well that Carissa had. You're asking questions about how to not be exploitative of Native American traditions and of indigenous traditions, but how are they going to be policed? And what are going to be the repercussions? Because asking the questions is one thing, taking action is another one. And so I would love to know how you guys are planning on taking action for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next I see Ian Sieb.
Abby. Hi, my name is Ian Sieb. I'm the governor's special advisor on cannabis and natural medicine for the state of Colorado. Just want to thank Denver for allowing this type of conversation to take place. I also want to at least acknowledge that at least some of what I heard today was in relation to state rules and regulations, laws, rules and regulations. And I just want to remind everybody that there is a separate process that the state is also running where there is an opportunity to be involved and to follow along, and that you can engage directly in the state's rulemaking process. I also want to point out that DORA, the Department of Regulatory Agencies that oversees the rules and regulations associated with our licensed facilitators, does have a federally recognized American Tribes and Indigenous Community Working Group. Tom Allen, who is on this work group, is also a part of that Indigenous Community Working Group. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 members that represent a variety of tribes around the United States, including East Coast, West Coast. I recognize that does not include South or Central America, but we do have something that we are running concurrently in an effort to have those conversations and consciously collaborate with our partners from those tribes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ian, for adding that additional context. Going back to Bohan Farrell, if you're able to unmute yourself, please do. Looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I'm just listening actively.
Oh, great. Okay, well, that brings us to time. It's 4 o'clock, so we're going to wrap up the meeting. Want to remind everyone that we are having a 5th meeting of the Natural Medicine Work Group on Thursday, July 18th from 2 to 4. And also want to remind everyone that on Thursday, July 25th, the State Natural Medicine Division is having their permanent rulemaking hearing on all of the rules that they have put out so far. And they have a couple of stakeholder meetings prior to that as well. And you can find all of that information on their website, which is linked in the slides here. So we'll have a recording of this meeting as well as these slides up on our website, denvergov.org/naturalmedicine next week. And then please feel free to email us with any questions or comments or additional feedback at exlpolicy@denvergov.org. All right, thanks everyone so much for a great discussion. And we will...
Sorry, can I say something really quick?
Please.
There's someone who texted me that said they had their hand up but weren't called for the attendees.
Is it Kendra?
Yes.
Okay, well, we're at times, but we can, Erica, do you want me to continue with public comment?
I think, yeah, we can do one more. Yeah.
Perfect. Kendra, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to express, there are all types of Native Americans. The borders did not exist before. I grew up outside Rosebud Reservation. I have a history and papers too, but I am not federally recognized. And my papers, we talk about pedigree, but there's a lot of hurt feelings because we know who we are. And those spirit molecules that we're talking about, those spirit beings that reside in plants, some of them have resided with us time immemorial, and we know who we are. And this type of rhetoric between tribal people of pedigree versus non-pedigree is shameful. And I just want to express that because there should be consultations across the board regardless of borders. And I want to say that much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra.
All right, any last comments before we wrap up? Okay, thanks so much, everybody. We appreciate your time here today. And as always, please feel free to email us with additional questions or thoughts. And we'll see you next time.